Hello and welcome. Artificial intelligence is revolutionizing industries, driving efficiency, innovation, and unlocking new possibilities worldwide. Well, that's for certain. From healthcare to education, AI offers solutions to long standing human challenges and inefficiencies. However, unchecked AI development risks amplifying biases, misinformation, and widening social inequalities. Today, we discuss the same, the boon and the bane of AI. There are brighter aspects, for sure, and then there is a dark side of this boon. Now, from India to the University of Michigan and beyond, Professor Karthik Duraisamy, who is joining us today, has charted an inspiring journey in aerospace engineering and artificial intelligence. A distinguished Indian mind making waves abroad, he is not only a leading academic, but also the founder of Geminus.ai. In this special conversation, as part of the series on Oneindia, where we feature prominent Indians making us proud abroad, Professor Duraisamy shares insights from his personal and professional journey, and he also discusses the future of AI and the scientific computing and offers valuable advice for Indian students, professionals, and industries shaping the next frontier of the technology. Welcome to the show, Professor Duraisamy.
Oh, happy to be here, and thank you for the kind words. Happy to join you.
Thank you. To understand, the context better, let's first begin with your own journey. You have had a fascinating journey from India to becoming a professor and directing a research institute at University of Michigan and founding Geminus.ai. Could you please take us through that journey? What were some key turning points that you'd like to mention?
Sure. So I grew up in Coimbatore. It's a beautiful city in southern India, for those who don't know. So both my parents were academicians and entrepreneurs, so maybe that rubbed off something on me, I guess. So in terms of the journey, I would say Spark was probably somewhere in the second year or maybe the first year of my undergraduate studies. I came across something called the finite element method, which is basically a numerical technique where you can take real world problems, like, you are designing, some device and you need to understand it better. How can you take that real world problem, write a bunch of equations and solve them on a computer, right? So I think that was endlessly fascinating for me. You could call it a passion or an obsession. And simply, I would say it's still endlessly fascinating to me. So I got interested in that area, and then I don't know, sometime around my second or third year in undergraduate degree, my dad got me an internship at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. It's a world-class institute, as many of you know, and that was my first brush with world-class excellence. So there I started exploring a bit more of the research. And then from there on, I applied to the US for a master's and PhD in aerospace engineering. And after that, I went to Scotland and then Stanford University, back to Michigan. So it's a wide journey, but basically, the idea here is around the time I moved from the from Stanford University to the University of Michigan, I started working at the intersection of scientific computing and artificial intelligence, as you just mentioned. So scientific computing is the first part of what I said, right? Writing down equations and then solving them to understand the world.
Right.
But of course, AI is more on how can you use data, right, to describe the world. So I kind of pioneered some research in putting these things together, and that really took off as a research area. And around the 2015, 2016 timeframe, a lot of companies also started coming to my research lab at the university to say, can you help us with this? Can you help us with that? So that's when I thought I should spin off a company. And it was an interesting journey because when you found a startup, you usually go looking for funds. In this case, there was a Silicon Valley venture capitalists who are looking for founders. So they provided some seed funding, and that really took off. So that's a
Right.
short journey, but I must say, if there's,
Mm,
I mean, you asked me turning points. I don't see it as turning point. The common thread here is, I have this intense curiosity to understand the world.
mhm.
Um, and then once in a while, you need to make yes or no decisions. And I usually said, okay, this is very interesting. Let me say yes. And then
Okay.
those binary decisions, take you somewhere. So it was not planned.
Mhm.
Um, it's a bunch of decisions that are basically driven by curiosity rather than anything else.
Anything, when it's got to do with the Indian upbringing that you had and its impact on the education and shape of your thinking in science and technology and entrepreneurship later on in the formative years?
For sure. I mean, clearly, right? I owe a lot, like all of us do in our
Yes.
generation, to our parents and the upbringing,
Hmm.
not just in India, but the India of the 80s and the 90s.
Hmm.
It was a very unique time. I think I'll get into that later.
Mm-hmm.
But I must say, my dad was very unconventional. So he
Mm-hmm.
was a very well-read and respected intellectual. He was, professor and head of department at a popular engineering college in
Mm-hmm.
Coimbatore. He'd founded companies, but he actually did not believe in the value of formal education. He
Mm-hmm.
thought it kind of stunted creativity. So he didn't even want me to go to college for
Right.
bachelor's at least. But then, he did not want to impose his views on me, and I was doing well in studies. So he just, you know, made me fill an application at the last minute. And, then after that, it's curiosity that opened up the world for me. So
Right.
as we both touched on,
Mm-hmm.
I think growing up in an upwardly mobile, well-educated family in urban southern India. So I'm putting a lot of qualifiers here, but I think you
Mm-hmm.
can see where I'm going with this. I think uniquely sets you up for success.
Mm-hmm.
If you read, I think it was Satya Nadella's book from 10 years ago, where he also talks about the suburban Indian. I mean, he even zooms into the South Indian
Right.
context.
Okay.
There are so many ingredients for success there, right? So I think the value of education, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that is a checkbox. And timing wise, our generation kind of straddled the
Mm.
system coming out of the socialistic views, and we went in the open market views.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that's very important is I feel we had the right level of access to resources and information. If
Uh-huh.
we had too much access, we take it for granted, right? If it is too little,
Mm-hmm.
then feels like we don't have enough to move. So we just
Mm-hmm.
had the right amount, and then we learned to work with constraints of all kinds, and then obviously we
Mm-hmm.
learned to deal with chaos of certain types. And
Right.
there's so many things like that. I mean,
Right.
um, yeah. So, but yeah,
Nice.
overall, I think our generation
Hmm.
just tends to be very adaptable and flexible. I think that's really um, I think the key thing there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I can totally understand. I hear you completely when you refer to the upbringing in India and then experimenting and learning things on the go, especially in different cultures. I think, your own background, your own association with the kind of upbringing you get plays a huge, huge role there. Taking you to the core area where you excel, AI and scientific computing. Now, this is something that the whole world is talking about, and there is a certain hype, I would say, around artificial general intelligence or AGI arriving in the next few years. What is your take on this topic, and what do you see are the implications? You work at the intersection of AI as well, and hence, that is something that we would like to know from you how important it is in the times to come.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think there is obviously a lot of hype and many definitions of AGI or artificial general intelligence. There are many definitions of AI, and there's so many nuances. But I think broadly speaking, what people refer to is a system or a machine that matches humans in cognitive tasks, right?
Okay.
And what do I mean by that? So can this particular machine or a system do many of the creative thinking,
Mm-hmm.
right, that humans are capable of? And so that's the definition of AGI. And some very smart people, right, think it is just 2 or 3 years away. And
Mm-hmm.
some other group of very smart people think it's maybe a couple of decades away. But in my opinion, it's a little bit of a distraction
Mm-hmm.
because AI can already do, as you know, right, many creative tasks very well.
Mm-hmm.
But it
Right.
also fail at certain simple tasks that we can do easily.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I think about this is just think of these as a wide spectrum of tools that
Mm-hmm.
humans can exploit, right? And the better of an expert you are in the domain, the better you'll be able to exploit them, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are some simple tasks like read me this 250-page document and summarize it, right? That it can do fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to go deep into exploiting AI, I think you have to be, I think, more of an expert. I think we'll touch upon that later. But
Right.
in
Right.
short,
Sure.
um, uh, what I think is rather than artificial general intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
what is happening now and what's going to happen in the next couple of years, even, is what I call as domain specialized intelligence,
Okay.
where models do are designed for specific tasks,
Mm-hmm.
like, for instance, doing mathematics or doing robotics,
Mm-hmm.
and within bounded contexts. Of course, there will still be general large language models like we see, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the real gains will come in these more domain specialized models. And I
Right.
also see a
Right.
future where many AI systems
Mm-hmm.
work with each other and humans.
Oh,
So I think that's, yeah,
the
what's coming
combination is on the cards then.
for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, AI and scientific computing, what are the, if I may ask, some of the most promising applications of this convergence, as you're talking about the combination, that we should also be aware of?
Yeah. So I think the key thing is,
Mm-hmm.
think about it as, you know, acceleration of things that we do, right? So think about discoveries and inventions that take
Mm-hmm.
20 or 30 years to happen. And those kind of discoveries and inventions to get compressed, those cycles to get compressed to say 5 years or 4 years or 3 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that acceleration is what scientific computing and AI can do together. Let me give you an example. Let's say
Mm-hmm.
you want to design a new material for a particular specification for a particular device, or maybe like, for an aircraft engine or something.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, what do we do? Engineers come up with ideas, they write some theory, they
Mm-hmm.
go do scientific computing, then they go do experiments, then they find it's not as good, so they come back. So it's a very long iterative process.
Right.
But with AI, all of these processes can happen simultaneously,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really going to compress the cycle by a lot.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So yeah, so I think that's one of the key areas that I would say it is accelerating what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
But also, these methods can also come up with new scientific hypotheses.
Right.
Um, but the key thing is anyone can come with a hypothesis, right? But the key thing is how is that hypothesis tested? Can you
Yes.
interact with the real world,
The genuinity.
get
Yeah.
feedback from the real world, put it back in, and accelerate the cycle? So these are, a couple of things. In my own work, we're using
Mm-hmm.
AI to predict short-term weather patterns. We are designing rocket combustors,
Mm-hmm.
nuclear fusion systems. So a lot of phenomena that are very hard
Mm-hmm.
to understand. But when you combine the strength of scientific computing, which is the details of the physics, and
Mm-hmm.
AI, which can accelerate these things, I think there's a lot that can happen in the next couple of
Right,
years.
right, right. Absolutely, Professor Duraisamy. The in-depth in which you have worked as of now in this field of AI and scientific computing, I can't help but bring it back to India again and again here. Since you are in the deep, in this field, what's your honest take, if I may ask, on how AI will affect education and employment in countries like India?
Okay. So, that's obviously a hard question because anything about India is a hard, thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about India, I make it a point to distinguish
Right.
two India, right?
Uh-huh.
One in which people like you and me live, which is energetic, limitless in potential, opportunity, whatever you have.
Mm-hmm.
The other is, the India that is actually impoverished. I was looking up recently, there was
Mm-hmm.
still 100,000 schools in India with one teacher or less, right? And that number used to
Right.
be like two, 300,000 back in, when I was in school.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the point here is, our GDP, our per capita GDP is actually less than Bangladesh's, and it was 50% higher 10 years ago. So the point being,
Right.
there's an enormous amount of human development that needs to take place. And this
Mm-hmm.
is low level, right? Access to education, access to information. So in these kinds of scenarios, I feel AI will be completely only beneficial, at least over the next decade or so, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But then there is the other India, right, that we live in, and people like us want to project. There's a little more complicated. I think content development and AI
Mm-hmm.
models will be commoditized. I feel routine coding, back office work,
Mm-hmm.
and other soft skills would kind of shrink. But I think there's also an opportunity because domain experts who are AI literate, I think will
Mm-hmm.
increase. So that you need to get better at your domain and AI.
Right.
It is not domain or AI, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think the net employment effect will be positive, I feel, if
Okay.
we skill and work on what is actually hardcore and not the soft parts.
Right. Professor, you did mention about the two aspects of India, and you are right. You are right when we talk about the diversity that we have and the differences are there as far as the allocation of resources and access to those resources is concerned. One big responsibility that falls on the industries and the think tanks is that they need to make them accessible. Do you think that Indian institutions and industries are doing enough to keep up with the global advances in AI? Where do you see gaps or opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And you talk about gaps and opportunities. One thing that comes to mind immediately to me is how the dynamic with China has changed. I
Uh-huh.
think you could argue, right, in the software space before the AI boom, before like say even 3, 4 years ago, you would say India was quite ahead, right? So
Right.
we had a very strong reputation for enterprise software, and then back office operations, IT support. Whereas China developed strength in consumer internet products, mobile apps, social media platforms, mostly domestic. And the reason why I bring this up is I feel the latter, that China, which you could argue in some sense, behind us in software, is now far, far ahead in AI, robotics, and assorted fields that play pretty nicely with where there's going to be huge growth, right? So yes, we have to, pivot to where the industry is going. I feel we are a little late to the game,
Uh-huh.
but I do feel that some efforts, especially in the last couple of months, like the AI innovation thing that the government is starting, I think is good. But all that said, I feel there's going to be a big change in even how companies like OpenAI and others operate these days.
Right.
Um, these days, we know them as companies that have these big models that are amazing, and then they give it to us, right?
Right,
But
right, right.
I think in the next few years, I feel they'll become more like consumer tech companies where they have a customer base and they give a wide range of AI services across the stack and the big
Okay.
model. So that means there are opportunities for us to build apps on top of these larger models. And that is something that I think India can do well. Um,
Okay.
but yeah,
Fair
I do want
enough.
to say, because you asked where do we have to invest?
Gaps and yes,
You,
absolutely. We have to look at both of them. Yes, gaps and
you know,
opportunities both.
it's, yeah, not just the positive part.
No,
So I think compute infrastructure, we are trailing. by a lot. I think these large GPU clusters, access to those have to become a lot more easy. We need to increase capacity not by 2 or 3 times, but 10 to 100x and soon.
Right.
So I think
Right.
that's a big issue. And then in industry, academia, let's not forget the importance of basic research and how to like translate that into commercial outcomes. So these are, some of the gaps that we should close very quickly if we want to
We
get
should be
on to
bridging
this,
them. One key
for sure.
aspect, Professor, since you mentioned China and you also mentioned broader scale and large scale, China has succeeded in building a strong university system over the past roughly 2 decades, if I may say so. What can India, do you think it can do to achieve the same?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, I would say maybe 30, 40 years ago, India and China were very similar. Maybe you could even argue
Yes.
India was slightly ahead, but China has really taken off in the last 20 years, as you mentioned.
Uh-huh.
Um, we have also done good things. I would say one thing that India has done well over the past 25 years is increasing access to higher education, literally tenfold. Um, but then what about quality of that education, right? So, in my opinion, we have at least one world-class research institution, which is in the Indian Institute of Science. And then there are pockets of excellence in biology, in medical sciences. The IITs produce, in still very good talent. But I think if we want to catch up with China and some other, global leaders in academia, we need to scale flagship universities, right? So what do I mean by that? So pick
Right.
10 universities, maybe IISc, a couple of IITs, and IISER, maybe at Ames, NCBS. So 10, and basically provide them with very deep and predictable funding. Um, and the state governments have to come in, central government has to come in, and then
Right.
philanthropy, industry, all of these have to come in, and we
To
have to
scale
attract
it up.
these, yeah, researchers. And in short, I think past 25 years we focused very much on quantity.
Uh-huh.
I think now it's you have to laser focus on quality. So the other thing I really want to point, maybe this I should have answered asked earlier, is
Right.
as a fraction of GDP, our research spending is still less than 1%. And many
Okay.
leading economies are at 2.5% or something, right? So there is still a lot of room, but you can't put all the growth and average it across the whole thing. So if you're injecting, say, $20 billion, you probably have $10 billion for 10 schools and the other $10
Right.
billion for everyone else or something. So
Yes.
then you have both quality and quantity.
Well, that's a mix. That's a balance that India especially needs to strike.
Yeah.
Taking it, the conversation further, I would say for Indian professionals and students, many Indian students dream of a STEM career in the United States. What skills or traits helped you the most during your transition, and what should today's Indian students focus on, especially?
Yeah, as I said, for me, the single thing was that I was intensely curious, right? And, I grew up in a family that really valued education. And so I would say for me, I'm privileged and also lucky to grow up in that particular time and space.
Uh huh.
Uh, but if you ask me about, what I can tell aspiring professionals, I would say the ingredient is, be curious, but also learn one or two things really well, really deeply. Doesn't matter what exactly you're learning, but you need to learn to like go deep into any particular domain. And if you go deep into any particular domain, then you basically develop the skills to go deep in any other domain that is needed at any point, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, it's not like you have to like learn AI. You could be in a physics major, or you could be in commerce or whatever, right? So just get very good at, being hardcore, developing expertise in any domain, and then of course be aware of how AI can help and how other things connect.
All
So
right.
it's not very profound advice. It is whatever you're doing, just
Hmm.
do it really well. And then, yeah, look around, be aware of opportunities. It's going to basically take care of itself.
Absolutely true, true, Professor. And I would say that in my limited experience also, what you are saying actually stands out. You need to be aware of your surroundings and be a keen observer, and rest of the things definitely follow. Obviously, hard work is also one of the key components. Moving on, what advice now would you give to the Indian engineers and coders, especially who want to future-proof their careers in the age of AI?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And so this is a very specific question, right? So if you're in coding, that
Yes.
is, at a very, very interesting time, right? So nobody knows the answer, right? But I think the bigger answer is coding alone used to be enough to like build an incredible career, and that day is gone, right?
Okay.
Because 95% of what the code we produce right now can actually be written by AI, and some would argue 100%, right?
Okay, is
But
it?
then,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, it is, especially some of these newer tools are incredibly good at, coding. But if you think about it, what is coding? Right? It is expressing what you want to do in terms of code, right?
Right.
So the focus is, instead of focusing on the code, think about that expression piece, right? So what is it? The idea is more important than the code, right? And I also feel, I said earlier, soft skills, right? I would say until now, if you could write well or speak well, that gave you a big advantage, especially in a country like India. I still
Right.
think going to exist, but that is going to shrink. I think the value will come to the ideas, rather than how you do it, because these tools can actually address the how you do it part. So yeah, focus on the more deep creative tasks rather than things that you know can be algorithmized and just being done. That doesn't mean you don't have to learn programming. Like you still need to be a good programmer to use AI, but I think there'll be less programmers needed in the future. So,
Right.
you got to sit one level higher than the programmer. So that's really what.
Well, now, Professor, you're right. When it comes to, once again, since we are talking about both opportunities and gaps, talking about, future-proofing the job opportunities and in this field of AI, are there areas within the AI or scientific computing where Indian talent is currently underrepresented but has huge potential?
I think so. I mean, uh, I think interestingly, right? So we've always had this, culture of, deep learning. We've had this culture where intellectual pursuit in various disciplines, we've always been represented well in the global stage as a fraction of, if you take the US or any other major Western country,
Uh-huh.
if you look at the percentage of Indians in that country versus what they do,
Right.
you know, I think we are overrepresented, I would say, but the two Indias idea, right? If you
Uh-huh.
divide that by the total population we have, then we are, vastly underrepresented. So surprising to me that even in some of the bigger AI companies that have come out of late, except one, which is Perplexity by Arvind Srinivas, I actually
Yes.
see slightly less founders and deep thinkers in the AI space, even in the US, Indians, than I would have expected. So that is a bit worrying. But on the other
Okay.
side, there are so many startups in India, especially in Bangalore, that are starting to uh, make waves, right? So I think, as I mentioned earlier, as consumer tech becomes incredibly important in I think a lot of Indian talent is gonna come out. The other thing that is missing, I feel, is um, compared to some other countries, the basic research in AI that's coming out of India, in my
Right.
opinion, should be more improved. So, So again,
Okay.
we need to amplify the research to commercialization pipeline, not just the commercialization pipeline, right?
Absolutely. No, for sure. I mean, be it the end user as Indians, there is definitely a very focused approach towards AI, not just about its usage, but also developing it and making it suitable for our own utility as well. One key aspect, Professor, which I also mentioned earlier, is the dark side of this boon. From surveillance to misinformation, AI can be misused, that's for sure. What safeguards do you think that countries like India should have in place while embracing AI?
So yeah, that's again a very tough question. It depends very much on the context, right? So you could argue even before AI took off, all of what you said is a major concern, right? So
Yeah.
so I think bringing the right kind of policies without stunting innovation is a very difficult minefield, I would say. So
Right.
you know, many of these models contain very deep biases, as you pointed out. So the Indian government is now, starting initiatives where, they want to develop contextual models that, contextualize for language and region and all the diversity that we have. I think that'll go okay that is part of the problem, but there are very, very deep questions, and nobody really has an answer. So in the US, if you consider the Biden administration had, some plans, but they took very long, didn't quite implement them. And then the Trump administration came over and, they scratched everything and, they have their own ideas. But I think the EU is the only place where I think some meaningful regulations have been put in place,
Okay.
but um, it's not something that translates over across all countries and across all regions of the world. So it's a very, very complex problem, and I think you need to be adaptive. To be able to change policies within 6 months or a year, because technology, when you talk about policy, you think long term, right?
Long term,
But the
yes.
technology is changing so fast that
It has to keep pace with that.
right. So flexible policies, I think, are needed, and there are very, very deep concerns that already there is enormous amount of misinformation out in the media, right? In social networks
Yes.
and other places, and AI is to amplify that. There is just no way around it. And I would say even some of the misinformation that is out there 3, 4 years ago, let's say, that was also powered by the early AI algorithms, right? So they know who is, your patterns, and they try to contextualize information, create echo chambers. So
Right, right.
yeah, but again, right, as with any powerful technology, there are going to be, a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. But what distinguishes this technology is it's just growing so fast.
Absolutely.
So
That's the biggest challenge also, I would say, to keeping pace with that. And you're absolutely right when you say that policy making and innovation, both of them going hand in hand, has to be flexible there. One other key aspect which I wanted to ask you, Professor, is that through Geminis AI, you are trying to bridge physical systems with digital intelligence. Where do you see this technology going in the next decade, and how might it impact Indian industries like manufacturing, logistics, energy?
yeah, very good question, right? So, just in short, what Geminis does is, you have a real world system, think of an aircraft engine, think of a wind turbine, think of a large oil and gas plant, think of even something like a smart city, right? So
Right.
that's the real world system, right? So if you want to basically make those systems think or make those systems intelligent, they need to be able to be aware of what is happening around them and they need to be aware of their own behavior in the past to various responses. So what we do is build so-called digital twins, where you have this real-world system. We build a simulation model that replicates this entire system and its behavior. And so we take data from the real world system, and then we basically give intelligence back to the real world system so it can, you know, optimize its performance, etc. Right. So
Right.
the way we think about it, and this is just one, way of thinking about it. There are other perspectives. One way to do this is by just using data and running AI algorithms, right?
Okay.
But I feel that kind of approach may work in many problems that are simple, but for very complex systems, AI alone cannot solve the problem, right? So we bring in additional information in terms of physical knowledge, etc. So where
Okay.
this can go is, especially as AI systems become incredibly powerful and our computational methods become powerful and computers become powerful, is every high value asset can be much more efficient than it is. That's one level. So think about improvements in efficiency that's easy to visualize. But there are many levels above that. These
Right.
systems
Right.
can start adapting themselves to the real world. They can change configurations,
Okay.
and they can actually become cognitive. I think that's the next challenge. Right now, we've made them, I would say, somewhat smarter, somewhat more intelligent. But I think the next level is cognitive intelligence. So these systems trying to operate and think like a collection of human beings with human beings. So that's,
Absolutely.
the where the future's going.
Absolutely, Professor Duraisamy. We spoke about the present, we spoke about the gaps and opportunities, challenges, future. One thing that also we need to mention is the solution part. Looking ahead now, what's one challenging problem in this world, or maybe in India, if I may ask, you hope that artificial intelligence will solve within, say, our lifetime?
Okay, so that's tough because our lifetime is many decades away, and it's
Right.
hard to predict what AI will do in the next 10
Given
years,
the
right?
pace it is growing, yes.
Given the pace it is going, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I want to take that answer, you know, in a slightly different direction, right? So there are many grand challenge problems facing society, right? If you think about energy, right? So energy is going to power everything, and there is a direct correlation between amount of energy a nation uses and the GDP, right?
Right.
So access to energy that is, sustainable, access to energy that is cheaper. So these kind of things, I feel even in the next 10 years, because of AI, they're going to improve radically, right? Even
Okay.
staying in the energy space, there is a lot of hype around nuclear fusion, right? As you would have heard. And if that comes to fruition, then you have a limitless source of completely clean energy, right? Unlike nuclear fission, which, there is, it's much more green. So a lot of scientific challenges need to be addressed, right, to
Right.
make that possible. So I gave you two answers. One is things that already exist, we can make them more efficient, but also things that we've not quite figured out how to do, I think AI can basically figure out. So if I want to give you one answer, yeah, I would say energy systems will become affordable. People are working on superconductors at room temperature. That's a breakthrough technology.
Right.
So in any field, instead of answering a question as, which problem, I would say in almost any field, efficiencies will improve and discoveries will accelerate.
Professor Karthik Duraisamy, thank you so much for speaking to One India and sharing your insights with us, with our viewers. And I can only say that we remain aware and we remain even more enriched when it comes to the knowledge about this huge, huge world of AI. Thank you so much. Professor, if I may ask, if you have to be reached through social media, any address that our viewers can find you or write to you maybe?
I mean, it's easy to find me on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
I think that would probably be the best channel to
Perfect.
reach me. Yeah,
Perfect.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for making us all proud there in United States, in the world also. And we wish you all the very best. Geminus.ai is something that is not just promising, but also promises to shape up the world, I would say, as you discussed throughout this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you for doing the show and all the best with your future ventures.
Thank you so much.